You are listening to the Global CTE podcast with your host, Sylvester Chisom.
Welcome, my friends, to another episode of the Global CTE podcast, where it is our desire to wrap a blanket of goodwill around the career tech education community. And we highlight the best, the brightest, the people who are really doing the work. Today is no different at all. We're in for a treat. I have my good friend, Rachelle Dené Poth here, who is a true pluralist as it relates to making an impact in education. Let me tell you about her. She's an educator, an attorney, consultant, author, French, Spanish, and STEAM teacher. She's also the founder of THRIVEinEDU, which is her consulting business. She's an ISTE Certified Educator and received the Making It Happen Award during the ISTE 2019, as well as the Presidential Gold Award for Volunteer Service to Education. She also now serves as the past president of ISTE Teacher Education Network and is on the leadership team of the Mobile Learning Network. Now, she's also an author, and I love the title of this book, Unconventional Ways to Thrive in EDU. In other words, quotes that push our thinking. Okay, now listen, we have so much to talk about here today, from NFTs to gamifying learning, and all of her features and articles across education. Please, my friends, let's welcome to the show, Miss Rachelle. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you, and also for such a great introduction as well. I appreciate that and all of your kind words.
Listen, you make it easy. You really made it easy because you're literally doing the work. I came across you on an article that you wrote about NFTs in education, and I know we're going to jump into that discussion because you're really a thought leader on the edge. But I want to start somewhere. We're just beginning the school year, and your book title, Unconventional Ways to Thrive in EDU. Can you just give us some advice around that subject?
Yeah, so that book is I should say, because it's been, a while since I have written it, but it came out of, I guess, this evolution of me as a teacher after having been in education for a long time, because I, for many years, was teaching the way I have been taught because it worked for me. I was teaching French, I was teaching Spanish, and I was thinking back to, when I went through my undergraduate, the methodology courses I had, we didn't have the things that the teachers that are in pre-service education programs have today. I wish we did. I wish we had the tech. I wish we had the way to connect. Yeah. We didn't have that. And so I went into the classroom just with the knowledge of what I had as a student from my experience. And so I just kept repeating that same kind of a cycle because I'm like, hey, it worked well for me. It'll work for my students. Mm-hmm. But then I noticed student engagement and just the connections with students and the relationships. I started to see all of these different things that weren't really working out that well. And so I decided to take some risks in my classroom and make some big changes and do things that were pretty much unconventional or not, the normal for me, or may not be the normal things for other people that they wouldn't think of, and I'm sure other educators have said this. I've said before, I'm just a Spanish teacher. I'm just a French teacher. You put that word just in there. And then you think well, I'm just a Spanish teacher. I can't teach about artificial intelligence, or I can't bring coding into my classroom. And so for me, I really broke out of, the different things that I was doing. It was normal for me, and took some chances with some things in my classroom. And I wasn't an expert. Most of the time, I really had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that what I had been doing wasn't working really well. So when I put that book together, I made a list of just things that would be different for people, and in some cases innovative, but not in some big scary way, because the word innovation itself, you might think oh, you need tech or it has to be amazing. It's just something new or different. And so it's just a collection of ideas that hopefully people might read and look at and be like, oh yeah, you know what? I was using that tool, but I didn't know I could use it for this, or I never thought about bringing augmented virtual reality into my classroom, but I can do that. And it's not my conventional way. But
let me cut you off there for a moment, because you're going down the road of interdisciplinary education from the Spanish and French teacher standpoint. How are you implementing that tech into your class? Like you said, AR, VR, give me some tactical stuff there. What's that look like?
Oh, I love the word tactical as well for that. For let's see, a couple of years, I think it's probably been about 6 or 7 years now at this point. We lose track of time, but I was working on my master's degree, which I'd never gotten, but it was in educational technology. And we had to use Nearpod. And I knew about Nearpod, but I'd never used it with my classes. So I made a lesson. It had, the VR trips in it, which were great for my students, because instead of saying like, imagine what it would be like if we went to Mexico, like they could actually look at that. Yeah. And so that's kind of as far as I went in my class, as far as like, anything related to, augmented virtual reality. And then in my STEAM class for 8th graders, I did a lot of the AR VR. And my students in Spanish 2 this one year, probably about 4 years ago now, came up to me and they said, how come we don't get to do any of that cool AR VR stuff? And I had no answer. And I had never thought of it, because I thought, I'm just a Spanish teacher, I can't do more of this. And so that kind of pushed me to start to bring in some different apps and tools to have them not just consume like they were with the Nearpod, because I was creating it. I actually had a student who didn't want to use the technology and then ended up creating their own account in Nearpod and made this virtual trip for his classmates as a project. And that was another thing for me where I'm like, yeah, I don't have to be the one making all of these lessons. Like the students can be the creators, and then of course the innovators with them. So, there's lots of resources out there. There's no shortage of digital tools. And even if you're a math teacher, social studies teacher, science teacher, there's amazing things out there, either to just have the kids look at. If I had a merge cube, which I would grab, but it's a little bit further over there, when I was in geometry or learning about the solar system, and to hold the solar system in my hand and to be able to like manipulate it, I would have remembered where the planets were way earlier on. But there's a lot of excitement to it, and it does boost engagement. And of course, focusing on the why, but there's a lot of things that we can bring in. And if nothing else, over the last couple of years, teachers have learned to be really flexible and creative, and they've embraced more technology and risk-taking probably than before.
No, 100%. Like I think the old mold has been broken, right? So like if you were that teacher on the front end and you were wanting to try something different, the pandemic really created the space for that. And if you're kind of old school, like, hey, that stuff is not going to work anymore. And you really have to make that personal connection with the kids. I love how you just said that student created his own Nearpod trip to Mexico to share back with the class. That's was that from your STEM class or from like one of your?
No, it was a Spanish 3 class. Yeah, they had a project to do where it was camping and travel vocabulary. And I didn't care what they created. If they wanted to do a skit in the front of the room, that was fine. That was me being unconventional too, because I'm like, I just want this vocab narrated in these different verb tenses. And this student, after having done that Nearpod, came in the one day and just said, I have my Nearpod. And I said, well, I'm not sure. What do you mean? Well, I made a Nearpod. And so I said, well, put it on my computer and then I'll do it. And he said, oh no, I made it. I'm the teacher. And I went, well, okay. So
what I said, that moved you to the guide on the side, like,
it did.
Go for it.
Yeah, whether or not I was ready for that or expecting that, but that's what it got me. And then after that, like the other students started to create with it and then use it in other classes and teach other students. And so it just, it took that first leap, and then you see the benefits, especially whenever you see the students taking more of a lead, especially the ones too, they're like, I don't want to use this. Why can't we just draw something, or, technology again? But then whenever they take it on their own and see the benefits of it, it makes a big difference. For them, and then of course for us.
Yeah, I just did an interview with my guy Petri from Finland. He's an educator from Finland. He's talking about how the Finland education system really prioritizes that choice and voice part there, where like, we know where we're trying to get to with the learning, but if the kids want to find their own way to get there, then let's allow it and try to be supportive of it. So hats off to you. What school district are you in?
Riverview. It's probably like 15 minutes from Pittsburgh. Okay. So it's a junior senior high school.
Junior senior high school. Okay. So is that like, how would you describe the area? Is that like a rural area or no?
Yeah, it's suburban. Yeah, but it's a smaller district, but I think we have roughly 1,000. We have 2 elementary schools and then the junior senior high school, which is grade 7 through 12. So yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's a nice school.
So tell me more about the STEAM class that you're
Yeah,
running.
the
What kind of activities? What are you some best practices around there? What are you doing in
well, I don't know if I'm the one to ask for best practices, but
there?
people often ask, how did you get started with doing some of these things? And I've always loved technology from the time I was a
Okay.
kid and I was in eighth grade, just always curious about it. And, now at my age, being able to look back at like how different things are. So my school had gotten a grant to change our library into like a makerspace. We got a STEAM grant. And of course, teaching
Okay.
French and Spanish and the arts, I was asked to teach one of 4 different courses they were going to offer. And for the first 2 years, I was teaching students about coding with hummingbird robots. And they were kind of connecting it to something related to the French or Spanish culture. So I had students that made like the Eiffel Tower and had somebody on a bicycle. And then, it was moving. But then, and I really wasn't that good at it personally, but the kids were great. And the 3rd year, I was like, all right, I'm ready for this. And they decided to move that to a different grade level. And so I had the chance to come up with whatever. And so I named like 10 different things. And then I just named the course STEAM What's Next in Emerging Tech. And so, for me, like right now, beginning of the year, we've been looking at old technology. I had a rotary phone that I pulled out and old computers and pagers, and like having them identify things. And then a big focus at the beginning of the year is digital citizenship, because the kids all have their phones in their hands. They don't necessarily know how to write an email to a teacher or to interact in the permanency of some of what they post. So we spend some time on that. But what I love about it is it's, what's emerging. So if I get a news alert about something in artificial intelligence or AR, VR, I bring that into the classroom. And I think the most important thing for any course, it's a STEM or STEAM or however, stream, however you want to call that, is really just finding a lot of different resources, whether they're, hands-on materials, but then looking at the benefits, because connecting it to like social emotional learning, just having opportunities where kids can become, be creative and they can collaborate and they can deal with challenges, give them some of those STEM challenges where even as adults, sometimes we're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here, but like that's preparing them for life and for dealing with some of those struggles. And I just like for my class, for it to be a fun kind of curious space where, it's not meant to be stressful, even though sometimes it is when they're doing coding. But I learn so much from them, and I have a ton of fun just, like when they walk in and I have a Walkman around my neck and, the headphones on and they're like, what is that? Or I'm like dialing on the rotary phone or so forth.
So you really go there like with the with the old tech. You're pulling out a Walkman on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have I have like the cell phone in the bag where, but they'll come in and I'll be like, oh, wait, I have a phone call, and I open it and I'm like, all right, how you doing? And they're just like, what is that? And then the best is when they try to guess, but just showing them, like the things that you have, like right now, like the other day we were talking about, I said, your phone, like you're carrying a computer in your phone. I said, when I was your age, I would have had to have like 20 different things for, I mean, not just 20, but way more than that for what you can do on a phone. I said, I would have needed a TV, a record player. I kept naming. And, but, we talk about innovation and where ideas come from and try to make predictions for the future. And so I think a big part of any of those spaces is just like the conversation and, like what if kind of questions.
What's that look like? I'm curious, what's a conversation look like in the class around what do you all think is next? What's coming next? Like how do you set something up like that?
Yeah, so sometimes it depends. Sometimes I will pull out, the rotary phone, or we'll look at, say, the cell phones, and I have a bunch of them. I got the BlackBerry, I got the flip phone, I have like all of them. And then we look across time and then compare, like this is what it was in, say, 1990, and then in the year 2000, this, and then we'll look what the kids have now. And then they'll work together and talk about, what they might like to see on a phone, or will we even need a phone? I'm like, what if you walk around, you just like tap on something, you got glasses on, you just tap and it like does everything. And then the students come up with ideas. Well, maybe it'll be a chip, or maybe it'll just be all in front of you. And I don't know, just try to look at it, and then sometimes go in reverse and see like what were the changes that happened, and who thought of it, and how does that make your life better or easier. And then of course we also talk about the the negatives or the
Mhm.
considerations or concerns that we might have with some of the tech. Like, all of this is great, but what are the concerns that we have as far as security? So it opens up a lot. Sometimes, it can tend to go like off topic a little because they start to think of other things like, oh, well, what if instead of this? But it's neat to see them do that. And then later on in the year, we do things like Genius Hour. And so
Okay, what's that? Tell me.
so Genius Hour is, it's kind of similar to doing, again, not an expert. I would recommend Don Wettrick's book, Pure Genius, because he talks about it, but it goes back to like Google and having 20% time, where you basically, students have a chance to explore something that they're curious about, they're interested in, and then they share their genius. So I have one student that a couple of years ago, when we were fully virtual, went around their house and just picked up random objects and used Flipgrid to narrate as they were walking around and eating an apple, to say, well, I found this styrofoam cup, so put that down. And they picked up some other things, and they tried to think about a contraption they could make. Well, at the end of the day, they came up with, they wanted to make a backpack that was able to provide heat and cooling, so that whenever they walked to school when it was hot, that it could like cool them down, but also keep their food cool. And whenever it was cold outside, like the opposite. And they were trying to make something with whatever they could find. Other students might have an interest in a certain area or be curious about a topic, and it's a chance for them to do that independent kind of exploration and then share what they find. But it's personalized and authentic and meaningful to each student. And so then you have a higher engagement, plus what everybody else learns in that process, tie in the social emotional learning skills. Like, you might find out you have something in common with somebody else, and then you're like, hey, you know what, let's create something together. Like, let's actually make a product or try to create something. So it's just, it's full of opportunities. And I mentioned Don Wettrick, who's great. He always says opportunities are everywhere.
Yeah,
You just have to take a step.
it's and I love that. To me, it sounds like you're really running your classroom in that way, that opportunities like exist everywhere, and showing those kids that. Now, one thing you said that I'm like over the moon about, you're going real time with the information in terms of emerging tech, based on like, here's today's article, current events, and bringing that into the classroom. What, for someone who may be listening, like some best practices on trying to stay current in your classroom, like what, give me some thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, things I wish I knew a long ago is being connected and asking, not being afraid to ask for help, reaching out. And we have so many ways to do that now compared to when I first started teaching. So, it takes like joining in a Twitter chat or getting into some type of a book study, or, your school might have a PLC. And if not, then forming one with people that whether or not they're in your same school. They might even be around the world, because we have that capability right now to do that. Because not only does it bring in opportunities for us, it really helps our students as well when they see us connecting, and then, we learn new ideas. But you have to kind of, take that leap, I guess, sometimes, and explore different things. And the other piece of it too is, like, with so many things changing with technology, with all of these trends, the AI, the AR, VR, it's not just that like it should be taught in a STEAM course or a computer science course or something like that. Like, there are materials available for students pre-K all the way up. And with the way that the world of work and even education is moving, with all the predictions for the number of jobs, the skill sets that they need, and who knows, a lot of the jobs that are going to be replaced because of automation, we all can do things in our classroom, even with the youngest learners, to help them to build skills, just to see, even if they're curious, because there are, I think, a predicted 58 million STEM-related jobs that will be available in the next 5 years or less. And, there's a lot of, like cybersecurity in the last couple of years, that has skyrocketed. And students need to know if they're interested in that, and what better way than to like build in opportunities for them to learn about it. Even if it's just a simple like coding with like Post-it notes and red solo cups, which is like one of the, I was like, how is this coding? But then, it is
it's like foundational.
Yeah. And so
I want to ask you something. You talked about getting in community. How has being a part of ISTE really informed your teaching or been impactful for you?
Yeah, so I did not know what ISTE was until I entered that master's program, and they gave us, we had to join one of two groups. We either had to join CSTA or ISTE. And so I looked at both of them, and then I chose ISTE, and I think that was in 2014, and just started to become involved in some of their learning networks at the time as, a volunteer community member. And then I was asked to be on the leadership team for Teacher Education Network. And I was like, me? Seriously? But it was such a great opportunity. But prior to attending my first ISTE, I finally got onto Twitter, which I never believed in social media for the longest time. But then I started to see how powerful it is to connect and meet these people. And then going to the first ISTE and say like, oh my gosh, like you're a real person. I've known you for like 8 months and we've, collaborated. But over all of that time until now, just continuing to build a network. And I know that if I have a question about something in STEAM, or even, I want to connect my students with somebody who's in a Spanish speaking country or anything, like I know so many more people now that I can bring in all of these really authentic experiences. And it doesn't take that much time, because you can invest as little or as much time as you want. You don't have to do all the things. You just need to find like one space to kind of start. And then next thing you know, you're going to be in all the spaces. But ISTE has been a tremendous experience, both with the conferences, even the discussion community. They have the Twitter spaces and things, but it's just nice to have that, global kind of connection, or those global connections.
No, that's awesome. And it's so important to get involved with community, or to find community. It's something I say all the time. The right who can answer your questions so much faster, or elevate an experience. But you have to be in community to do that. Listen, I came across you on Getting Smart, like on you blog for them, I noticed, and you were talking about NFTs in education. So tell me, like, what are your thoughts? How do you think the role of NFTs in education, and like how can they help us for the better?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. I can tell you that there has been, and I think it's coming back now, Rabbi Michael Cohen had been doing Twitter spaces on NFTs. And when I started to do some research on it, I think it was back earlier this year, probably January, well, maybe February or March. I knew what NFT stood for. I didn't realize, all of the details about it. I wouldn't have been able to teach about it in my class other than like showing a video or something. But when it comes to education, some different universities, for example, are using NFTs to represent like, or for authenticating like college certificates, for example. And so it's like a token of your academic achievements, I guess you could say, at the higher education level. And so instead of potentially like you have the certificate where, somebody, just like fake news, somebody could generate this certificate and you're like, oh, that's really great. It actually authenticates it. So you can't, make it up. You can't forge the NFTs. And so, some schools, maybe in K-12, who knows, the way things are moving, might decide that they're going to use NFTs for reasons like that, like issuing a certificate, or for student records, or maybe students had taken some standardized test and so they want to access those results, or just for some record of some other academic related achievement that students had. Those are just some of the things, but there have been a lot of other articles coming out about like textbook companies looking at NFTs and the potential for digital textbooks to be used and resold and so forth. But there's a lot out there about it, especially when you look at like credentialing and micro credentials and things like that too.
That's what I was gonna say. I really think that's kind of the low hanging fruit, I believe, like in the space of like you said, micro credentials and being able to like verify and track that, and maybe even upload the learning verification tied to it. I think it's definitely an easy way. I've seen some art classes using I was talking to an art teacher, and she was trying to like add an element of tech and entrepreneurship to her class, and she had the kids making NFTs and uploading them to like OpenSea. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I had read about that too, and they was just talking about like it's a great way for students to make the digital art, express themselves, and it's something that they can sell. And I mean, it's authentic, also boosts some creativity. And I don't know, we'll see what happens with it. But it's every day I get alerts about, I keep track of like Web3 and metaverse and NFTs and all of that, because we need to know about it too. Even I had written an article about financial literacy. And, it's not just like credit cards and checkbooks and money anymore. It's like, are you going to pay me with Cash App? Like credit card, like even the other day, like you can swipe it or you can tap the thing or the chip reader. And like, it kept giving me these errors. And I'm like, what happened to like the old slide across? But we have to keep up with it, even if we're just, and we were saying the word just an elementary teacher or just a Spanish teacher, like we have to get rid of the word just, because it's fun to learn about those things and to see what the kids do with it and then tie it into whatever it is that we're teaching, because we are super creative as educators.
Yeah. So, okay, last question, because this question has been on the future end. What's your view for like the future of career tech education?
Yeah, that's a good question at the end. I think a lot of it, well, I shouldn't say a lot of it, but I think that there's a lot of potential for using things like virtual reality for it too, to open up other opportunities for students to learn. That might be one thing. And that's something that I've read more about recently as well, especially in the past 2.5 years, where like opportunities were limited, or students who live in areas that don't necessarily have access to the right resources, those types of things could make it more accessible for them, or just create an awareness about the possibilities that are out there. Because sometimes, in schools, the students don't have opportunities to learn about like the real world and those experiences, and having even something like that, just to give that view into it, might just spark some interest in a student that otherwise they wouldn't have. So,
yeah, I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for all your sharing. So listen, I know I have to highlight this really quickly. So
sure.
I know you have your THRIVEinEDU consulting business. How can people connect with you and around what subject matters or topics?
Yeah, so I am pretty consistent, like on all the spaces. So on Twitter and Instagram, it's RDENE915. If you add a Gmail to that, you can email me. If you put the www and the .com around it, you can go to my blog site. And as far as things, topics, pretty much anything at this point, the augmented virtual reality, artificial intelligence, social emotional learning, STEM. My whole motivation is that I love to learn. And if I can make it easier for teachers to get started with something, even though I may not be the expert, like I just want to share what I know with others and help to coach and instruct others too about like what it looks like, what some of the challenges might be, and to connect for my own learning too.
100%. Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights on tech, STEM, some instructional things, even the foreign language, and really connecting, like making interdisciplinary real in a unique way. I really love everything that you share. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it, share, and make sure you connect with my friend. You will make sure you will see her information in the description to connect. And as I always say, you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Global CTE podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to be the first to know about future episodes.